Good afternoon, and thanks for being here. I'm Amanda De La Rosa, Director of Program and Strategy at College Futures Foundation. We are joined by 1,000 of you from across the country. So let me take a minute to introduce you to College Futures more broadly before we jump in. College Futures is a private, nonprofit foundation in California on a mission to increase post-secondary attainment for equitable economic mobility. And we do so through an acute focus on the learner, their agency, and their aspirations. I have the privilege of leading our Golden Opportunities Initiative, which is all about redefining the value of higher education, not just as a pathway to a credential, but as a real vehicle for economic mobility, especially for underserved learners. We believe the post-secondary system is capable of delivering more value for more learners in more places. And too often, learners have been navigating the system without clear, accessible information about which options will lead to good jobs and financial stability. To help change that, over the past 2 years, we've partnered with Michael Itzkowitz of the HEA Group to produce 4 reports collectively measuring how California higher ed institutions and their programs stack up against those goals. We think this evidence-based approach can be an effective starting point or an accelerant for other states too. That QR code on the screen will take you to all of our previous reports and analyses. And most recently, we launched the California Mobility Index, which ranked our public four-year institutions based on how well they combine access and economic outcomes. Today, we come to you with a new analysis, Golden Returns, that puts a spotlight on our community colleges and certificate granting institutions, sorting them regionally, since we know that location can be an important predictor of opportunity in California, and ranking them by the way they deliver ROI for their learners. We've had leaders ask us, how can I move up in the rankings? And the short answer is affordability and earnings really power this measure. Higher ed has long prioritized affordability, and that still remains essential. Access, student success, completion, and persistence, all of that matters. This isn't an altogether brand new playbook. The gains we see today reflect years of investment in those core strategies. But if we want to go further to truly deliver economic mobility, higher ed must be a more active partner on the employment and earnings side. That means reshaping programs to be in closer alignment with our changing economy and ensuring policy incentives and accountability measures are prioritizing the right things. Not just acting as a matchmaker between supply and demand, but becoming an engineer of opportunity and prosperity through all stages of a learner's working life. That's what we're here to talk about today. Here's a look at our agenda. Next up, we'll dig into the findings. Then our president and CEO, Eloy Ortiz Oakley, will offer his reflections. And then we'll spend the second half of our time together learning from an esteemed panel of leaders who are going to help us all inspire action. We've saved 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions of Eloy and the panel. You can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen throughout the session. Our team will be responding in real time and then also queuing up some of your questions for our panel at the end. You'll also find a few housekeeping reminders in the chat as well. And with that, I am excited to hand it over to Michael Itzkowitz, founder and president of the HEA Group, to walk us through the findings from Golden Returns.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Hello, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your afternoon on the East Coast, finishing up your morning on the West Coast. It's a pleasure to have you here. And as Amanda said, I'm going to walk you behind the methodology and the findings behind the report. So as mentioned, we looked at 327 community and career colleges across California. Understanding that California is such a big state, we understand that there's a lot of regionality that needs to be taken into account. So we actually broke up these ROI measures into 12 economic regions across the state. Just to give you the scope of who's included within the analysis, Out of the 327 institutions, 121 of those were public institutions, 186 were for-profit, and 20 were private nonprofit. In total, this covers more than 1.2 million undergraduate students throughout the state. Now, there are obviously different levels of these institutions and what they predominantly award. So 120 of these within the study did primarily focus on awarding associate's degrees, while most of them in the study, 207, predominantly offered certificate granting institutions. So we're going to dig you through the methodology to show you how we know kind of what's behind the numbers. So this is the way that we measure the years it takes students at these colleges to recoup their costs. So the first thing that we look at is net costs. And the way that that's defined is it's essentially the out-of-pocket costs. It's what students pay out of pocket after all grants and scholarships are deducted. So they can either pay that through personal finances or taking out federal loans to help afford their education. Now, the next thing we take into account are earnings premiums. And the way that we define this is something that you all are probably kind of familiar with nowadays, but it's the median earnings beyond the typical high school graduate within California. So we're able to look at the ACS study and the census study, and sort of we were able to see that students between 25 and 34 years old typically make around $32,500 per year. So if you make more than that, those are your additional dollars that you get by attending a specific institution. Now, I'll just touch on this briefly, but why do we focus on these two things? There are absolutely many other benefits to a higher education that we all well know, but we also know at this specific time that the number one reason why students will not pursue a post-secondary education, be deterred from it, is because of affordability. And the number one reason why they are attending an institution of higher education is for greater employability and to obtain a financially secure future. So we mesh these together and we get years to recoup your educational costs. So looking at the bottom of the screen, you can see at the largest community college in California, American River College, it takes students 1.2 years to recoup those costs. So how do we get to that number? Well, we can see through the self-reported data at the college that it costs students about $4,600 a year out of pocket. If it takes them 2 years to get their associate's degree, that's about $9,200 that they are paying to get that degree within that specific amount of time. Now, these students at this college earn around $40,000, and that's about $7,700 more than the typical high school graduate within California. So if it costs them $9,300, but they're making $7,700 more, it'll take them about 1.2 years through those additional earnings to recoup their costs. And that's the basis of our analysis. Now, we're going to give you a snapshot of what we saw across the state and within region specifically. So this is just a snapshot. As mentioned, we did break this down regionally, but just to get a better understanding of how all of these institutions fell across California in terms of their ROI, we actually saw and recognized 59 institutions that show the majority of students able to recoup their costs within 1 year or less. And I think that we can all agree that's a pretty quick time frame. Now we see 124 that take a little bit longer. Students are earning enough to recoup their costs in about 1 to 5 years. Now on the right-hand side of this slide, you can see that there are actually 95 institutions within the state to where there's no economic ROI whatsoever. Now, what that means is that the majority of students at these colleges are actually earning even less than the typical high school graduate in California, even 10 years after they initially enrolled. So this was just a breakdown between the different kinds of regions. Now, obviously, as you can assume, in the more densely populated areas, you're going to have more opportunities to enroll in an institution of higher education. But these differ greatly throughout the state. So in the Los Angeles region, we can see that there are 87 institutions for students to choose from if considering a community or career college. In the Bay Area, there's 45, but there are some regions to where there's much less access to opportunity. Some of these 12 regions actually only have one or two options if students want to go to school at one of these institutions. I will just I will just acknowledge something before or now about the regionality is one of the main reasons we did this is we know that students typically travel, I think on average about 17 miles to get to a college, especially a community or career college. So it's critical that they know the options around where they live or around where they work when considering these options within the state. So within these different regions, you can see that there are a different amount of institutions for students to choose from, but we also notice that there are disparities in terms of the likelihood to get good and or poor outcomes depending on what's available to you. So looking at the Los Angeles region just as an example, that's our largest region that has the most options available. There are 87 institutions in that specific region. Now, what we saw is that actually only 14% of these within the Los Angeles region allowed their students to be able to recoup their costs within 1 year or less. But we saw almost a third of institutions within this region that had no economic ROI whatsoever. Now, within different regions, we see different results. As you look at the Bay Area region, just below the Los Angeles region, you can see that it's sort of the inverse in terms of the likelihood for an institution to provide a quick ROI. 38% of institutions within that area allow students to recoup their costs within 12 months or less, meaning that the education is affordable enough and they're earning enough to be able to recoup those costs quickly. And we also see only 13% of institutions within that region that provide no economic ROI. One thing that we noticed as we were breaking down the data is that we started to look at sector and notice disparities or concentrations of certain outcomes dependent on the specific type of institution that delivers the post-secondary education. So one of the most obvious things to look at was the outcomes for public colleges within the state, the 121 public institutions, and the 206 private institutions. Now, at our public institutions, we actually saw that 40% of those allowed students to be able to recoup their costs in 12 months or less. And only 2% of those, 3 out of the 121 public colleges within our data set, showed no economic ROI whatsoever. Now, again, we kind of get an inverse effect when we compare that to private institutions within the state. There are many more of these. We had 206 private institutions within our sample, but only 11 out of that 206, that's 5%, showed the majority of students able to recoup their costs within a 12-month period. And on the flip side of that, we actually noticed 45% of these, 92 of them, that showed no economic ROI whatsoever. Once again, meaning that the majority of students actually earn less than the typical high school graduate within the state. Now, something else that we saw was that there were a number of institutions that were delivering very strong, very real, and very rapid returns. So we looked across the state and identified the top 25 throughout the entire state of California that showed the quickest ROI for the students that they enroll. Just to give you the scope of these institutions, something that stood out to me is that they're larger in nature. While we have 1.2 million undergraduates in our study, just at these 25 institutions alone, they enroll over 240,000 undergraduate students as an aggregate. Now, there are some common characteristics in terms of outcomes when we think about top performers throughout the entire state. Number one, they span across the entire state. In fact, they're identified within 7 out of the 12 economic regions where community colleges and certificate grading institutions are located. We also notice that most of these cost less than $5,000 per year and allow students to earn more than $10,000 per year than they would have if they hadn't attended an institution in the first place. We also saw through Community College Chancellor's Office data that they oftentimes enroll majority low-income students at their institutions, so possibly providing economic mobility to many of their students. So these were just the institutions that stood out, and this is also available on our website. Now, like a lot of our studies that we've done with College Futures over the past 18 months or so, one thing that we always do is make all of our data publicly accessible. I always say this does no good sitting on my hard drive. We want you all to have it. We want you all to use it. We want this to begin a conversation, and we want you all to begin to dive deeper. So you are able to download this and utilize it. Everything is available, of course, free and accessible to you. Now we have all of this information on our website. You can definitely scan the QR code. I saw someone asking for a link. I assume that's been dropped in the chat already, but we have a lot of these key facts and findings. We have our press release. This officially came out yesterday. We have a detailed documentation of the methodology and of course the data and the data dictionary. So with that, thank you very much, and I'll pass it off to Eloy.
All right, Michael, thank you for that analysis and for the voiceover of the great work that you've done once again in partnership with us here at College Futures. And thank you everyone for joining us here today for this important conversation. My name is Eloy Ortiz Oakley, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president and CEO of College Futures Foundation. Let me just take a moment to thank the entire College Futures team for the work that they did to lift this important analysis and to produce this webinar today, and for all that we will do in follow-up to this webinar. I also want to give a shout out to our board chair, Ashley Swearingen, and the entire College Futures Board of Directors for putting their full faith and confidence in this team. Now, let me start by saying something simple yet urgent. For learners across California, and when I say learners, I mean all of the working class, middle class learners here in California, busting their butts, trying to gain a foothold in the ever-changing economy. We're here in California and also across the nation. For them, higher education is meant to be a gateway to economic mobility and opportunity. But that promise they've too often heard in slick marketing material, in ads on Instagram, in radio ads, that promise too often depends on where you live, what you study, or what kind of institution you can access. And to us here at College Futures, and hopefully to all of you, that's simply not good enough. So at College Futures, we believe the value of higher education should be measured the way our learners measure it. And right now, they're asking incredibly practical questions. Questions like, how much will this cost me? In true costs, not in some machinations with discounted tuition and all sorts of other hidden costs and discounts, the true cost. How quickly can I finish? Because I've got to invest a lot of time that I'm taking away from family, from work, and other things I have to do to get by. Will this lead to a job that helps me support myself and my family now and into the future? That's the definition of value that our learners hold, and therefore, it should be what we choose to measure. And as Amanda mentioned at the top of this webinar, that doesn't mean that we dismiss things like access or persistence or completion. All those things still matter, but all those things matter in service of creating value for our learners. Because if post-secondary opportunity doesn't deliver on that kind of return, then it's not delivering at all for our learners. So that's why we launched Golden Returns. This regional return on investment analysis gives us a clearer picture of which institutions are helping learners move up and where there remains serious work to do. There are certainly bright spots, especially in our community colleges, and we hope those community colleges continue to expand those bright spots. But there are also persistent gaps by sector, by region, and by background of the learners served. The data makes it plain. Not all colleges or all regions are delivering on value. Not all of our regions are coordinating well, and not all learners are getting a fair return. Now, let's be clear. This is not about blame. We're not trying to blame any institution or individuals in this state. This is about building better systems, better information, and better alignment between what learners say and invest and what they get back. As many of you know, this is also a pivotal policy moment. We've been focused here at College Futures on this work long before the current administration came into office, long before the chaos and the promulgation of multiple executive orders, and certainly before Congress worked on finalizing the new federal accountability system that was created in the recently passed reconciliation bill. But that policy backdrop also adds new urgency. Post-secondary institutions need to understand how they stack up, not just for compliance sake, but to truly deliver on the promise of economic mobility. So here's our call to action. To institutions, and when I say institutions, I mean college and university presidents, system leaders, academic senate leaders, department chairs, chief academic officers. We need to not stop at the data. We need to go deeper. We need to dig deeper. We need to work harder and use this data to redesign programs of study and policies around what actually helps learners thrive. To our policymakers and state leaders, you have a critical role to play. You set the table. You send the signals to the field. We need to strengthen our state's capacity to measure and understand these outcomes ourselves. Because guess what? We can no longer rely on federal data sources. States like California and throughout the nation need to continue to invest in their own data capacity. We need to be able to invest in more tools like the California Cradle to Career Data System, invest in better access to wage and occupation data, and a commitment to aligning public investments and accountability measures with the kinds of credentials that lead to good paying jobs. And to all of us here today, let's make sure that our learners no longer have to cross their fingers, say a prayer, and hope that a post-secondary education pays off. Let's make value the expectation, not the exception. Thank you all for joining us here today. Now, I'd love to welcome our panelists and jump into a conversation about this analysis. And I'm looking forward to moderating a conversation of some excellent panelists who are joining me here today. And with me here today, as you can see, is Ashanti Hands, president of San Diego Mesa College, which ranks third overall in the state. Congratulations for rapid ROI. As well as President Keith Curry, president of Compton College in the LA region, and Mac Powell, president of the Accrediting Commission for Community and Junior Colleges, ACCJC. Thank you for all of you for being here, and thanks for digging into this data with me. So let's jump right in. Let's start with President Hance. Once again, thanks for joining us. So this should be a proud week for the San Diego Regional Colleges. 3 of the top 5 community and career colleges in the state offering the quickest return on investment for learners are public community colleges based in the San Diego region. And as an LA Dodger fan, it's hard for me to say that San Diego is leading in anything, but there you go. What we're seeing in San Diego region is tremendous. So President Hans, what makes that region such a powerhouse for generating economic mobility?
Awesome. Well, first, let me say that it was an incredible honor to learn that Mesa College, along with our sister colleges, Miramar and City College, were ranked among the top 4 community colleges for return on investment. So, this recognition just really affirms our commitment to not just access and completion, but to economic mobility beyond completion. So having access to this data and analysis has really allowed us to hold up a mirror to our work and revealing where equity-minded decisions about prioritizing economic mobility are translating into impactful outcomes for our students and where we still have room to grow. So I'm just going to highlight briefly 6 examples that span regional, district-wide, and campus-specific areas that we think are helping to unlock these outcomes. So regionally, I am very excited to say that our San Diego Strong Workforce, which we call our regional consortium, works very well together, very hard, and our efforts have been transformative. The initiatives through our region serve 95,000 students annually and connects with nearly 5,000 employers across San Diego and Imperial counties. Just at Mesa and Maricosta alone, 23,000 students participate in work-based learning experience each year. And I'm going to drop some information in the chat so you can learn more about what that work looks like. At the district level, we made a collective decision to revise the cost of attendance to reflect the true cost of living in San Diego. So this increased Pell and Cal Grant eligibility. It lowered net cost and gave us a more accurate picture of unmet need, ultimately shortening the time it takes a student to earn back their investment. Another district program is our San Diego Promise program, which provides up to 2 years of free tuition, book grants, and wraparound support. At Mesa College, we've expanded this program 18-fold in just 5 years. So together we are reducing expenses, removing financial barriers, and creating clear, supported pathways to timely completion. And the majority of the students that we serve through this program are underserved minoritized students. Additionally, through private donations, foundations, and some public funds, our district addresses last mile barriers by covering licensing and exam fees, which can range from $250 to $1,200 for nearly 1,000 students in healthcare programs each year. So that supports ensures that students don't miss out on high-paying jobs that are often right there at their fingertip due to financial constraints posed by licensing and exam fees. We get them into working jobs soon. So at Mesa College, our Impactship program, it's interning with a purpose, has served more than 700 students, particularly adult learners and those historically excluded from unpaid internships. So what we do is we provide funding so that all of our students have access to paid internships. And we have support from over 200 employers. So students gain professional experience, they build networks, they get paid, and they are stepping directly into jobs in our community. Lastly, I'll share that we offer a baccalaureate degree in health information management designed with ROI in mind. It has a 95% graduation rate, a 90% job placement, and leads to starting salaries around $50,000 with potential to reach 6 figures. So because the degree builds on an associate pathway, students save time, they have reduced costs, and we launch them quickly into high growth, high paying careers. So these are just a few of the intentional ways that Mesa College, the San Diego Community College District, and our regional consortium are driving economic mobility, especially for historically underserved and underrepresented communities.
Let me ask you a quick follow-up to what you just mentioned. The work that happens to create high ROI in regions is certainly a big part of that are the institutions like San Diego Mesa, but it also is about the partnership with workforce entities in the region, with employers in the region. What do you think is the secret sauce there in San Diego in terms of the glue between Mesa College and some of your partner or sister colleges and the employers in the region?
I think a lot of the secret sauce is that our regional consortium does a lot of research. And through that consortium and positions, we are constantly working with our community, right? And working with our industry partners and researching and trying to figure out what is going to be most impactful for Mesa College area, what's going to be most impactful for Palomar College. And then we are doing the work to make sure that we are partnering with our employers to make sure that we are responding to the needs that they see through that they are articulating through our certificate and degree programs. We are tailoring our internship programs to meet those needs. And so it is just a lot of collective effort and work that is happening at the college level and us listening and being attentive to what is happening in our surrounding areas. And we have the research and the data to support it so that when we engage in these conversations and dialogue, our foundation is strong in terms of what can be, what will impact our students, and what will be a resource to our community.
All right, thank you. Let's jump to President Curry. Keith, thank you for being with us. I mean, you have personified unapologetic leadership in our system. You lead a college that's in one of the most urbanized areas in LA. It is a place where many underserved learners live and work. And you've done such an incredible job to lead that institution from losing its accreditation to where it is today. Given this data that you have now, and I know you and your team have already begun working on it, what are you doing to use this data to accelerate continued change at Compton College?
Thank you very much, Eloy, for the opportunity to be here, and also the College Futures Foundation for the work that you have done with HEA. I would say it this way. It takes 13 years for students to recoup based off data for Compton College. Am I upset? No, I'm not. I look at it as an opportunity. I look at this as Compton College Recovery 3.0. The first recovery was accreditation. The second recovery was the completion by design and reorganize our institution. And now it's about accelerating completion with a focus on equity and success. And so we just redid our strategic master plan, and it's called Compton College 2035, which has one goal, which is accelerate student completion with a focus on equity and success. And the reason why I bring that up as part of 3.0 is because this data is informing us of how we can improve our programs on our campus, but really focusing on our students. Let me give you an example of this, right? So we had a student who graduated this past year, had 7 degrees and 1 certificate. Everybody was excited about 7 degrees and 1 certificate. Had over $20,000 in financial aid that was awarded. Of that, $12,000 was loans. The students attempted 118 units and passed 105, and will be transferred to a California State University campus. Problem is that they're at the max as it relates to Pell Grants, and their major, based off of the job that they're looking for, they won't be able to recoup that investment for more than 13 years. So now we have the opportunity to say what is going on and how can we organize ourselves to support students to succeed, but then also to look at the return on investment. And so as we look at Compton College Recovery 3.0 and a focus on student completion, all of our data is publicly available, but the Board of Trustees approved new set goals and targets for the institution, and we will be setting a new goal as relates to the ROI, and that will be brought forward to the board by October of this year. Why is that important? Because it's important for us to know a target for 2035 as relates to ROI, but then also we have to be able to assess that, not just at the institutional level. The way we're doing our institutional set goals and targets, we're actually applying the same formula to programs and departments on the academic affairs side and also student services. So that means the programs have to take onus and responsibility as it relates to the targets, but also as it relates to the ROI. As an institution, we have to retransform our thinking about how we work with our students, but also looking at the data. So we set institutional set goals or targets dashboard, which I would drop, where it's publicly available and you can be able to see where we're at. But in the future, you'll be able to see where the programs are at. Then we're going to realign our program plans and our program review to include the institutional set targets and the ROI. So that means your planning will be connected to the targets and the ROI. So when I look at this report and where we're headed as a state, but more importantly as Compton College, this is part 3.0. And it fits in perfectly well in the conversations as we implement Compton 2035. And it can't sit on a shelf. So when you look at strategic plans and also these types of reports, how do you operationalize this report in order to support your students? To ensure that the student I just mentioned, who is transferring, who's not going to be able to get Pell Grant their senior year, how can we make sure that does not happen again? The onus is not on the student. The onus is on Compton College and our institutions.
That's great to hear, Keith, and it's great for our audience to hear what you're doing with that information, because that's exactly what leaders should be thinking about. I mean, the more and better information we get, the more opportunity there is to turn that information into greater opportunity for our learners. Now, let me ask you a quick follow-up. How do you ensure that this data doesn't sit on the shelf, and how do you engage with your employer community? Because part of the analysis takes into consideration, whether intentionally or not, the job market in that region and how aligned we are as institutions with the jobs that are available in the region. So how will you use this to engage with your employer partners?
So first, when I talk about Compton College recovery 3.0, in 2.0 regards to completion by design, we reorganize our whole institution around the guided pathways model. We're the meta majors. Now we're linking with our majors to the businesses within our community. So our staff has already mapped out what businesses in our community are connected to our majors. They have been looking at what are the employment, the salaries for those jobs within those organizations. And we're starting to reach out to those organizations to begin those conversations to link them to our academic programs. And I think that's the first step regards to not sitting on the shelf and engaging employers. But we have to be very intentional. So being very intentional for us as relates to Compton 2035 is in health, right? How do we link our students from the CNA program, building an LVN program to nursing into jobs within our community as it relates to health? And so we're actually hiring an apprenticeship coordinator to work at just specifically with health. And we already have 4 employers who are part of this partnership, but really focusing in on health as our first strategy, but building that out within each of our guided pathways divisions.
Thank you, Keith. Let's now turn over to President Powell, and let's talk about accreditation. Like everybody else in higher education, your world has been turned upside down recently. A lot going on in the accreditation world, a lot of questions being asked about what is the future of accreditation. So for you in this environment and your colleagues, what should accreditors be doing right now to help institutions transform in this increasingly high stakes environment? What is the role of the accreditor there?
Well, thank you for having me today. And I think that I would just start by saying, continue the focus on students, continue the focus on outcomes, continue the focus, to your point, Eli, on data that can help drive institutional transformation. For those of you that don't know what accreditation is, so we are an organization of 138 institutions. We are chartered, recognized by the Department of Education under the Higher Education Act. We oversee the education of about 2.5 million students and annual federal student aid awards of around $2 billion. Today, we released new dashboards for all of our institutions, including a metric around return on investment. We believe that transparency will not only help students make good decisions, not only help inform the public of the true value of higher education, but can also help institutional stakeholders be proud of their work and continue to strive to do better.
That is great news. I think it's welcome news, because I think as the entire ecosystem, we need to work together, sending the right signals to institutional leaders, to students to communities to employers, I think is critical for this to turn around and work for our learners. Now, College Futures has been working with your organization, proudly working with ACCJC. Again, as the field continues to evolve around this question about economic mobility, how do you see institutions that you accredit using some of this new information that you're releasing today, the dashboards? How would you like to see them use it, especially given that many institutions are tuning in today and should be looking forward to an accreditation visit?
Well, I think that we have to begin to look inward. And I think that there's no single metric, there's no single outcome that defines an institution. There are many, and institutions serve a lot of different types of students. People come to community colleges and our institutions for varying reasons, and we have to honor all of those reasons, all of those individual students. However, I think that we can see some composite numbers that cause institutions or should cause institutions to look deeper, to say, how can we improve? And I think that metrics like these that cut across institutional types, that cut across region, may not necessarily be a sole indicator of quality, but it is an opportunity to ask questions. So, President Hands, what did you do at your institution? President Curry, what did you do at your institution? I think it gives us the opportunity to look across the state, to look across the country, to see what institutions are doing well, and how can we partner with them? How can we learn from them? How can we be mentored by them? I think that collaboration, that collegiality that institutions should have, can only benefit students in the end.
Well, we have about 8 minutes left before we want to open it up to a conversation with participants on this webinar. But let me ask a few quick follow-ups. Keith, let me quickly turn back to you. You talked about the importance in your sort of phase 2 transformation of the Guided Pathways framework. What connections are there you see between the Guided Pathways framework and economic mobility, or what should institutions be thinking about doing as they evolve their Guided Pathways strategy?
I think that's a great question. And it's interesting because this work started under your leadership as the state chancellor for California Community Colleges. And I would start with that when I look at the Guided Pathways work, and I also look at completion by design framework, is understanding how we connect with our students from dual enrollment to the initial application, how we support students' completion and transfer level English and math, and what does that look like at our campuses? How do we ensure students do progress? Are they completing over 40 units on our campus or 60 units, and what that look like? And what they complete based off of their degrees? And the key to this is the transition. So when we talk about completion by design framework, and in this conversation, we're talking about transferring to a 4-year college or university or getting a job with livable wages. So when you look at the completion by design framework, which includes Guided Pathways, that last piece of transition, this fits perfectly into those conversations where you're looking at your data as relates to ROI of your students from your programs who are actually getting those jobs with livable wages. And I can tie it right back into how do you do your program mappers and your program maps for each of your programs, where you're showing students, these are the courses you have to take in order for you to complete this degree. And these are types of jobs we qualify for. And these are the salaries for those jobs. So students are able to see that when they're at your institution. So it fits perfectly. The question is, how do you organize yourself around that? But then also, too, how do you recognize those barriers that students are facing, not only about basic needs barriers, but also barriers within your own process? Let me say that again. Also barriers within your own processes. So for example, at our institution, more of our students are graduating with a general studies degree. That's a problem. Why are not our students changing their major early on, and at the end, they're getting a general studies degree? They're not going to make that much money as it relates to the ROI. So how do we make sure that we get counselors involved to meet with those students early on, regards to their major? And that happens before progress. That should be happening at the entry level as relates to the completion by design framework. So we have to reorganize ourselves or rethink again as relates to transition, but also look at those barriers and be unapologetic and open to sharing what those barriers are and saying, you know what? When students' transcripts come from other institutions, how are those processed? And how many units are they coming with? And then how do we support those students who are transferring from another institution with units that might not lead to that degree, but make sure the students are getting into the right major and are supported. But really looking at the barriers within your processes that can support our students.
Thank you, Keith. That's an important reminder that the initial implementation of guided pathways was just a first step in a journey of many steps, and it wasn't supposed to be the last step. So appreciate your perspective there. Now, President Hans, let me put you on the hot seat a little bit. We are living in a sometimes chaotic, certainly continuing to evolve environment in higher education. Every day is a new day. Every news cycle brings some new news about where we're going or how we need to survive. And with the recent passage of the reconciliation bill, that bill includes a new framework for how to measure programs of study. And of course, the issue here is if a program of study does not have a good return on investment over time, then the institution risks losing access to Title IV, access to Pell Grants for that program of study. Given that and some of the other changes that you see coming in this environment, whether it's questions about how we identify underserved learners, questions about how we reach out to our community, questions about our learners, in my view, this is an environment where the leaders that take the right risks, that lead with conviction, are the ones who are going to be successful. What risks do you think that you and your colleagues as leaders of institutions need to be taking right now in order to bring to fruition this promise of economic mobility for learners across the state?
There are huge risks that we must take. And as community college leaders, and especially sitting on the panel with Dr. Curry and all of the incredible people that we are working with, we know that now more than ever, we have to take bold risk. We have to be unapologetic about how it is that we see and serve our students. One of the biggest risks that we're going to need to take is the courage to hold up the mirror, to look honestly at our data, our outcomes, who we're serving, who's left behind, who we continue to leave behind when it comes to economic mobility. It is going to take having difficult conversations about the programs that we are offering, how it is that we are coordinating and structuring our schedules. It is going to take some bold, courageous conversations. And I know at Mesa College, like one of our themes this year, in light of all that is taking place, is that we have to be rooted, right? We have to be rooted now more than ever in our work, right? And we further say that we have to be guided by equity, right? In that. And so what happens is when there is chaos, we often will look out, we've got to quiet that noise and go deeper into what makes us who we are. So we have a vision of being the leading college of equity and excellence, right? That is our character. Those are our values. That is who we are. So that when there is chaos, when there are storms, it's your roots that allow you to weather those storms. And so what that means is that we are going to have to be intentional, one, in seeing our students, in truly seeing our students, reflecting, like holding the mirror up and against what it is that the world, that our environments, that our workforce industry needs, and being the bridge intentionally about our programs that we're offering, about the opportunities that we have to connect students through internships, through research, those things that will often lead to economic mobility that many of our partners at our 4 years institutions have figured out how to build in to the work that we do. And so we are going to have to rethink, not just mend or kind of alter what it is that we're doing. We are going to have to think of things that have never been done that we know need to be done. So for example, our MESA Impactship program, right? The thought that our students are often interning, or students who intern and get paid have incredible access to opportunity to build their capacity, their networks. We believe that all students should have paid internships. So when you say that, you can't just hope that someone else is going to do it. We have to do it. That's that whole concept notion of we have to be the change that we wish to see in the world. And that's difficult. That is hard. We also need to understand that there are a broad range of programs that our students are involved in. Our child development program is critical and essential for many of our community members. We know that oftentimes the wage or the return on that is not always what the community needs or what we want, but we understand the benefit and the impact that has to the individual and to their direct communities. And so we are going to have to rethink how we do that, how we package those programs, and how we tell that story in the midst of how it is that someone is determining or trying to shape and define. So there's a broad range of things that we have to do. And I think the biggest challenge is pausing and taking the time to do that work, which is what this analysis and this research does. It gives us the moment to pause and say, where are we? Who do we say we want to be? Where is the gap? And how do we fix it?
Well, on that note, I want to wrap up with a few comments and then open up to questions from the audience. Sarah and team will be helping us field some of those questions for the panelists. And let me wrap up our conversation just by saying thank you to all of you. This is a moment of reflection, not just because of the chaos in Washington, D.C., but the chaos, the root of that chaos, which is a lot of Americans, a lot of Californians questioning the value of our institutions, the value of higher education, the value of their efforts. So now is that time to grab that mirror and look at it with clarity, not with blame, but with clarity about what do we need to do to regain the trust and confidence of our learners and to help them access the opportunity that we want for every single one of them, regardless of their background. You know, on the most recent podcast episode I did, I talked about leaders. Leaders in this moment who are leading with conviction are the leaders that will be remembered as the leaders that mattered in history. And these three leaders, President Powell, President Curry, President Hans, are those kinds of leaders. So, you know, we turn to the audience. What kind of leaders do you want to be in this moment in time? And how will history remember your efforts and our collective efforts? So with that, Sarah, I will turn it over to you to field some questions for this great group.
Thank you, Eloy. We have a question from the audience. Where the ROI is low, is it related to programs offered or average of jobs offered in the area?
I'll start the answer and then happy to kick it to anybody else who wants to chime in. The first answer to that question is we at College Futures want that question to be raised. We don't have all the answers. We know what the data is saying. And that should be a question every institution working with regional employers, working with economic development organizations, with mayors, with county supervisors, with elected officials and state policymakers to answer that question, because it could mean different things in different regions. Yes, there are certainly some pockets of the states and regions of the state that have higher wage jobs that are available in a region. I mean, that's clear between Inland Empire to the Bay Area. Those are questions that need to be asked and answered directly with this kind of data and with the kind of data that California is investing in. Happy to invite anybody else on the panel to chime in on that question as well.
So I totally agree with the comments, Eloy, that you just made in regards to that. But I also think about how we take this data. Look, 13 years, I get it, right? But how do you work with, for example, we're working in LA County with our supervisor from the second district, Holly Mitchell, and we work with El Camino College and also West LA and also California Competes to really look at how we organize ourselves around workforce development. And we have funding from another foundation to support that. But the onus is back on the leaders, not just as college presidents, but also leaders, the elected officials within our community. So our Assembly member, Mike Gibson, we've been working with him on our community health project, our partnership that's within our region. And we have foundations who want to work with us on that. And then we're also working in LA County on nursing, but really being unapologetic at this moment within these regions where you see the numbers are where they're at, and try to identify how do you bring in more employers within that area to support what we're doing, but then also being critical of our own programs, right? If it's taking too long for our students to get through, right, 4 to 5 years, that's a problem. And saying, how are we going to redesign to make sure our students get through? And then also, how are we going to make sure that when they transfer to a 4-year college or university, they're going to get through as well? And being realistic about that. And what I mean by being realistic about it is we put a lot of money into transfer and want to see our students transfer. But then we're doing tours to Northern California. We're doing tours to HBCUs, but our students are not going. So we have to realign our resources to support our students. So our transfer stuff is all about 50-mile radius. And we're only going to focus in on college on 50-mile radius, but work with those 4-year college presidents to really see how we can support our students when they transfer. And so think about the data and knowing that we're at 13% and in the region that we're in is how do we work with our elected officials? How do we work with our 4-year colleges and universities? How do we work with our community-based organizations and our employers to say, you know what? The onus is not on the student. The onus is on us. And what are we going to do collectively to change these numbers within our community? And I've seen that change happen over the last couple of years. Now this data could be the more of a conversation starter with other individuals who do not understand, or who have not seen, or who don't understand the sense of urgency of this moment regards to employment. Eloy, we all know jobs change communities. Income change communities. I want to see more people from Compton, Linwood, and Paramount be able to buy a home within their community. Absolutely. 40,000 is not going to cut it. So let's be real about that. So how can we make sure our students have return on investment where they can buy a home within the communities that we serve? And they're not going out to the Inland Empire out of state to live. Let's talk about, that's the real conversation, right? We're talking about Black and brown communities where people cannot buy a home. We have multiple families within one home who are trying to survive. So when we talk about return on investment, let's see more of our students be able to buy a home within the community that they came from.
I love that. I love that, Keith. That is so critical and so important. And there was something that I put in the chat that I just want to make sure is on the video in case if this is replayed that they can't, because we talk about those risks and those bold things that we need to do. And a lot of that has to do with letting go of our legacy practices, right? We tend to do what we have always done, which get the results that we have always had that will no longer work. For our students. We got to let go of that, of those sacred programs that no longer serve today's students and the needs of our students being able to buy homes, to take vacation, to have 401ks. And we tend to fall again into these comfortable cycles that don't keep pace with the urgency of mobility. And so I think it is absolutely critical that we are bold and unapologetic, as Dr. Curry has said, in these areas. And so I think one of my additional closing statements is listed there in that chat, that meeting this moment means being bold enough to act on what the mirror reflects. And as Dr. Curry said, not seeing this from a deficit mindset, but seeing this as an opportunity to do better, to do right by our students, and to be brave enough to lead forward despite all that is going down. That's where those roots are going to be key. And then we get routed in a variety of different areas that will allow us to address the very things that this analysis has pointed out. So I'm very excited for where we go from here and how we use this information. And each organization, each college, each campus is going to have a different sense and level of agency. We have to identify that. We have to name it, and we have to do something about it now.
Well, amen to that. And this is why I love community colleges, keeping it real. Um, uh, Mac, any final words in the last 30 seconds we have before we begin to close from your point of view?
I think he said it beautifully. Institutions are in need of transformation. Every institution, not just version 3.0. You look at your iPhone, how many versions of that system update have you had? It's based on data. It's based on the user experience. And I think that the more colleges can lean into the kind of technology that we have on our phones that are all around us all the time, which is, the world is going to change and we need to change with it, and always on behalf of the students we serve.
All right. With that final word, thank you to this panel. Thank you to the College Futures team. And thank you to all of you for joining us on this webinar. There'll be much more to say and do after this webinar. And we look forward to working with each and every one of you. Please stay in touch. Follow us on social media. Reach out to us with any questions you might have or ideas. And let's work toward creating a more equitable economic mobility for learners in California and throughout this country. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.